The wallet held enough cash to change his month, but returning it would change his entire future. 16-year-old Jordan Carter never expected an ordinary Friday evening to become the most important day of his life. The autumn air was cold as he left the neighborhood grocery store where he worked part-time after school. His shift had ended 30 minutes late because another employee called in sick. Jordan did not complain. He rarely did. Every extra hour helped his family. His mother worked long shifts at a nursing home, and money was always tight. College brochures covered one corner of his bedroom, but some days those dreams felt very far away. Jordan adjusted the straps of his backpack and started the 2-mile walk home through downtown Baltimore. Streetlights flickered on as the sun disappeared behind the buildings. Most people hurried past without noticing one another. Jordan was thinking about a physics assignment due on Monday when something near a bus stop caught his attention. A dark brown leather wallet rested beneath a bench. He stopped immediately. For a moment he looked around. No one appeared to be searching for it. No one seemed concerned. Cars moved through the intersection. Pedestrians continued walking. The wallet remained exactly where it was. Jordan slowly picked it up. It felt unusually heavy. When he opened it, his eyes widened. Several $100s in cash were neatly organized inside. There were credit cards, identification cards, and membership cards from places Jordan had never heard of. For a brief second, he imagined what that money could do. It could help pay bills. It could repair the old refrigerator that kept breaking down. It could buy textbooks for next semester. The thought lasted only a moment. Jordan immediately pushed it aside. The money belonged to someone else. Then he noticed something unusual tucked behind one of the card slots. It was an old photograph. A smiling woman stood beside a young boy near a lake. The picture looked decades old. The corners were worn from years of being carried inside the wallet. Jordan stared at it longer than expected. Whoever owned the wallet clearly considered the photograph important. Then he found a business card folded behind the picture. A phone number was handwritten across the back. Jordan pulled out his phone and dialed. The call connected after 2 rings. An older man's voice answered. Jordan explained what he had found. Silence followed for several seconds. Then the man asked where Jordan was calling from. After hearing the location, he suggested meeting at a nearby coffee shop. Jordan agreed. 20 minutes later, he stepped inside a quiet cafe near the harbor. Soft music played overhead. The smell of fresh coffee filled the room. Sitting alone near the window was an older man wearing a simple navy jacket and a baseball cap. He looked nothing like the wealthy executives Jordan sometimes saw downtown. The man stood as Jordan approached. "You found my wallet?" he asked. Jordan handed it over. The man carefully opened it and checked the contents. Every dollar remained untouched. Every card was exactly where it belonged. Then the man looked up and smiled. It was not a normal smile. It looked more like relief mixed with curiosity. "Thank you," he said. "Most people would not have done this." Jordan shrugged. It seemed like the right thing to do. The man studied him for a moment. Then he asked a question Jordan never expected. "Tell me something. If nobody had ever known what you decided, would you still have returned it?" Jordan had no idea that the answer to that question was about to change everything. Jordan looked at the older man for only a second before answering. "Yes." The response came so naturally that he barely thought about it. The man leaned back in his chair and studied him carefully. "Even if nobody ever found out." Jordan nodded. "It still would not belong to me." A faint smile appeared on the man's face. For a moment, he seemed less interested in the wallet and more interested in the teenager sitting across from him. Outside the coffee shop window, evening traffic moved through the city, but inside, the conversation had taken an unexpected turn. The man closed the wallet and placed it on the table. "What is your name?" he asked. "Jordan Carter." "How old are you, Jordan?" 16. The man nodded slowly. "And what do you want to do after high school?" Jordan hesitated. It was not the kind of question he expected from a stranger. "I want to study engineering." The man raised an eyebrow. "Engineering?" Jordan smiled slightly. "I like figuring out how things work. I always have." The man seemed genuinely interested. "That is a good answer." Jordan laughed softly. "Most people think it is a boring answer." "Most people are wrong," the man replied. They sat quietly for a moment. Then the man removed the old photograph from the wallet and looked at it. His expression changed. It became softer somehow, more personal. Jordan recognized the look immediately. It was the same expression his mother had whenever she looked through family photo albums. "Who is she?" Jordan asked before he could stop himself. The man looked down at the picture. My mother. Jordan nodded. You keep that photograph with you everywhere. Every day for 27 years. Jordan glanced at the worn corners of the picture. Suddenly it made sense. The photograph mattered more than the cash, more than the cards, more than the wallet itself. The man carefully returned it to its place. Then he asked another strange question. Have you ever been offered an easy shortcut? Jordan laughed. Every week. And most shortcuts end up costing more later. The older man smiled again. Your mother teach you that? Jordan shook his head. Life did. Unknown to Jordan, two people seated across the cafe exchanged quick glances. One appeared to be reading a newspaper. Another worked on a laptop. Neither seemed interested in the conversation, yet both occasionally looked toward the table. Jordan never noticed. The man checked his watch and stood. Would you mind walking with me for a few minutes? Jordan was surprised by the request, but agreed. They stepped outside into the cool evening air and began walking along the harbor promenade. Lights reflected across the water. Boats rocked gently in the distance. The man asked about Jordan's family, school, job, and future plans. Every answer seemed to matter. Finally, they stopped near a bench overlooking the harbor. The man turned toward him. Jordan, have you ever wondered why some people succeed while others with equal talent struggle? Jordan thought for a moment. Opportunity. The man's eyes widened slightly. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small card. He stared at it for several seconds before handing it to Jordan. The moment Jordan read the name printed across the front, his entire expression changed. Jordan stared at the business card under the glow of the harbor lights. The name printed across the front was impossible to ignore. Richard Hayes, founder and chief executive officer of Hayes Technologies, one of the most successful technology companies in America. Jordan looked from the card to the older man standing beside him. The simple jacket, the baseball cap, the quiet manner. Nothing about him matched the image Jordan had seen in magazines and online articles. Yet there was no mistake. The photograph on the card was the same face. You are Richard Hayes? Jordan asked. The man smiled. I am. Jordan blinked several times. The Richard Hayes? The billionaire laughed softly. That is usually how people ask it. Jordan looked down at the card again. Suddenly, the entire evening felt different. He remembered the expensive credit cards inside the wallet, the unusual questions, the people in the coffee shop who seemed strangely interested in their conversation. Pieces that made no sense before now began fitting together. Why did you not tell me? Jordan asked. Richard looked out across the water. Because I wanted to meet the person who found my wallet, not the person reacting to my reputation. Jordan considered the answer. It actually made sense. Richard placed his hands in his pockets and continued walking along the harbor. Jordan followed. You seemed surprised when I said opportunity matters, Jordan said. Richard nodded. Most people answer that question with talent or hard work. Those matter too, Jordan replied. But two people can work just as hard and still end up with different chances. Richard stopped walking. A thoughtful expression crossed his face. That is exactly what my mother used to say. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Richard removed the old photograph from the wallet and handed it to Jordan. The woman in this picture taught me that lesson. Jordan studied the image more closely. The woman looked kind, strong, the sort of person who made others feel safe. She raised you. Richard nodded. Mostly by herself. Jordan handed the photograph back carefully. She seems important. Richard smiled. Everything good in my life started with her. They reached another bench overlooking the water and sat down. Boats moved slowly through the harbor while city lights reflected across the dark surface. Richard looked unusually serious now. Jordan, can I ask you something else? Sure. Richard hesitated. If you had kept the money, nobody would have known. Your family could have used it. Why did you not take it? Jordan thought for a moment. Because eventually I would know. Richard looked at him quietly. What do you mean? Jordan shrugged. Every time I looked in the mirror, the answer seemed to affect Richard more than Jordan expected. He lowered his eyes and smiled slightly. Several yards away, a woman appeared to be talking on her phone. Another man stood near the railing looking at the water. Jordan did not notice either of them. Richard did. Then the billionaire checked his watch and nodded to himself. Interesting, he said softly. Very interesting. Jordan frowned. What is? Richard looked back at him. You are the third person this month who found that wallet. Jordan stared at him. What? Richard nodded. And you are the first person who returned everything. Suddenly nothing about the evening seemed ordinary anymore. Jordan stared at Richard Hayes as the words echoed in his mind. The third person this month. The first person who returned everything. For several seconds he simply sat there, unsure whether he had heard correctly. The harbor lights shimmered across the water while a cool breeze moved through the evening air. You mean this happened before? Jordan finally asked. Richard nodded. Twice. Jordan frowned. You lost your wallet 3 times? A smile appeared on Richard's face. Not exactly. The answer immediately raised more questions. Richard leaned back against the bench and looked toward the city skyline. There are moments in life when you learn more about people from a single decision than from years of conversation. Jordan listened carefully. Something about the billionaire's tone suggested there was much more to the story. Richard reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It contained several handwritten notes. Names, dates, locations. Jordan glanced at it, but could not make sense of what he was seeing. What is that? He asked. Richard folded the paper again before answering. Observations. Jordan raised an eyebrow. Observations. Richard nodded. I have spent the last few months trying to find something that has become surprisingly rare. What? Richard looked directly at him. Character when nobody is watching. The sentence lingered between them. Jordan thought about it for a moment. Then he laughed softly. That sounds like something my mother would say. Richard smiled. Your mother sounds wise. They sat quietly for a few seconds. Then Jordan asked the question that had been growing in his mind. Were those people in the coffee shop with you? Richard's smile widened. You noticed them? Jordan shook his head. Not until now. Richard laughed. Most people do not. Then he pointed toward the harbor. The woman who had appeared to be talking on her phone was now walking away. The man who had been looking at the water had disappeared into the crowd. They work for me, Richard explained. Jordan stared at him. You had people watching? Only after you called about the wallet. Jordan did not know what to think. The entire evening suddenly felt less random than he originally believed. Richard noticed the confusion on his face. Jordan, I did not arrange for you to find the wallet. Then why all of this? Richard paused before answering. Because once you found it, your choices became interesting. Jordan considered that. Every decision suddenly seemed larger than it had felt at the time. Picking up the wallet, making the call, returning the cash. None of it seemed extraordinary when he did it. Yet now he was sitting beside one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the country discussing character and opportunity. Richard reached into the wallet and carefully removed the old photograph again. Under the harbor lights, he studied the image quietly. The woman in this picture changed my life, he said. Jordan looked at the photograph. Your mother? Richard nodded. She taught me that success without integrity eventually becomes failure. Then he turned the picture over and showed Jordan the back. Written in faded blue ink was a short message. Jordan leaned closer to read it. The handwriting was old but clear. It said, when you find someone honest, invest in them. Jordan looked up. Richard's expression had changed completely. The billionaire no longer seemed curious. He seemed certain. Then he folded the photograph and returned it to the wallet. Jordan, he said quietly, there is a reason I wanted to meet you tonight. And it has nothing to do with the money. Jordan felt the weight of Richard's words settle over the quiet harbor. The city lights reflected across the water like scattered stars, and for the first time that evening, he realized this encounter had never been about a lost wallet. It had become something much larger. If it is not about the money, then what is it about? Jordan asked. Richard remained silent for a moment. He seemed to be choosing his words carefully. Finally, he looked down at the photograph once more before placing it safely back inside the wallet. My mother spent her entire life helping people who could not repay her, he said. She believed that character was the most valuable thing a person could possess. Jordan listened closely. Richard continued. When I started my company, I promised myself that if I ever became successful, I would look for people like the ones she helped. Jordan frowned slightly. People like me? Richard nodded. People who do the right thing even when there is no reward waiting. A cool breeze moved across the harbor. Jordan looked toward the water. He still struggled to understand why a billionaire would spend months testing strangers. Richard seemed to sense the confusion. You are probably wondering why any of this matters. Jordan laughed softly. A little. Richard smiled. Fair enough. Then he reached into his jacket and removed a small notebook. The pages were worn from use. He opened it carefully and showed Jordan several entries. Each page contained notes about scholarships, mentorship programs, internships, and educational opportunities. There were names beside many of the entries. Some had check marks. Others did not. "What is this?" Jordan asked. "A promise," Richard replied. Jordan studied the notebook. "To who?" Richard's expression softened. "To my mother." For several seconds, neither spoke. The answer felt completely genuine. Then Richard pointed to one of the pages. 5 years ago, I created a private program that helps students with exceptional potential who lack opportunities." Jordan looked at him. "A scholarship program?" "Partly." Richard nodded. "But money alone is not enough. Many talented young people need guidance, connections, and someone willing to believe in them before the world does." Jordan stared at the notebook again. Suddenly he understood why Richard kept asking questions about goals and dreams. The billionaire was not interviewing him by accident. He was evaluating him. "You were studying me," Jordan said. Richard smiled. "Observing, not judging." Jordan thought about that distinction. It mattered more than he expected. Richard closed the notebook. "Do you know what impressed me most tonight?" Jordan shook his head. "It was not that you returned the wallet." Jordan blinked. "Then what was it?" Richard leaned forward. "You never once asked how much money was inside." Jordan had not even realized it until that moment. Richard was right. He never had. The billionaire nodded slowly. "Most people focus on what they can gain. You focused on what was right." Jordan lowered his eyes. Nobody had ever described him that way before. Then Richard stood and looked out over the harbor one last time. When he turned back, there was a new seriousness in his expression. "Jordan, tomorrow morning I want you to come to my office." Jordan's eyes widened. "Your office?" Richard nodded. "There is someone I want you to meet. And there is something important I think you deserve to see." Jordan barely slept that night. After returning home, he replayed every moment of the conversation in his mind. The wallet, the photograph, the questions, the revelation that Richard Hayes had been observing him from the moment he made the phone call. By sunrise, he was already awake, dressed in his cleanest shirt, and riding a bus toward downtown Baltimore. The headquarters of Hayes Technologies rose above the surrounding buildings like something from another world. Glass walls reflected the morning sky while employees streamed through the entrance carrying laptops and coffee cups. Jordan paused on the sidewalk for a moment. He had seen pictures of the building online, but standing in front of it felt completely different. A receptionist greeted him by name the moment he entered. That surprised him. "Mr. Hayes is expecting you," she said with a smile. Minutes later, Jordan stepped into a private elevator that carried him to the top floor. When the doors opened, he found Richard waiting near a wall of windows overlooking the city. Unlike the night before, Richard now looked every bit like the billionaire Jordan had imagined. He wore a tailored navy suit and carried himself with quiet confidence. Yet his smile remained exactly the same. "Good morning, Jordan." "Good morning, sir." Richard laughed. "Last night you called me Richard." Jordan smiled awkwardly. "Last night I did not know who you were." Richard nodded. "Fair point." He invited Jordan into a large conference room. To Jordan's surprise, several other people were already there. Men and women of different ages sat around a table reviewing documents. Some looked like executives. Others appeared to be educators. One woman stood and shook Jordan's hand. "We have heard a lot about you." Jordan looked confused. Richard noticed immediately. "You are wondering what is happening." Jordan nodded. Richard walked toward a large screen mounted on the wall. A photograph appeared. It showed a young woman standing beside a small community college building. Then another photograph appeared. A young man working in a laboratory. Then another. A teacher. An engineer. A software developer. A doctor. Jordan looked from image to image. "Who are they?" Richard smiled. "Every one of them started exactly where you are now." Jordan listened carefully. Richard continued. "Years ago, I created a mentorship initiative. We help talented students reach opportunities they otherwise might never see." One of the executives handed Jordan a folder. Inside were scholarship details, internship programs, leadership workshops, and academic support opportunities. Jordan's eyes widened with every page. It felt unreal. Richard stepped closer. "Last night, I told you that opportunity changes lives." Jordan nodded. "I remember." Richard looked around the room before speaking again. "The people here spent the morning reviewing your school records, recommendations, and achievements." Jordan blinked. "My achievements?" Richard smiled. "You have done more than you think." The room grew quiet. Then Richard placed a final document on the table. Unlike the others, this one was sealed inside a blue envelope. "There is one more thing," he said. And it is the real reason I asked you to come here today. Jordan stared at the blue envelope resting on the conference table. The room had become completely silent. Every executive, educator, and program director seemed to be waiting for the same moment. Richard Hayes picked up the envelope and placed it directly in front of him. "Go ahead," he said. Jordan hesitated before carefully opening the seal. Inside was a single letter printed on thick paper. He began reading. With each line, his eyes widened. The document informed him that he had been selected for the Hayes Future Leaders Initiative, a highly competitive mentorship and scholarship program that accepted only a handful of students each year. The program included academic support, leadership training, internship opportunities, college preparation resources, and full financial assistance for higher education. Jordan looked up in disbelief. This cannot be real. A few people around the table smiled. Richard leaned back in his chair. It is very real. Jordan glanced down at the letter again. The numbers alone seemed impossible. Tuition support, housing assistance, professional mentorship, resources his family could never afford. His hands trembled slightly as he continued reading. Finally, he lowered the document. "Why me?" he asked quietly. Richard's expression softened. It was a question he had clearly expected. For several moments, he said nothing. Then he stood and walked toward the large windows overlooking the city. Because 28 years ago, someone asked that same question. Jordan listened carefully. Richard continued. "When I was your age, my family had almost nothing. My mother worked multiple jobs. We worried about bills every month. College seemed completely out of reach." Jordan was surprised. The story sounded nothing like the life people associated with a billionaire entrepreneur. Richard smiled slightly. "One afternoon, a stranger noticed something in me that I could not see myself. He offered guidance. Then opportunity. He turned toward the room. Without that opportunity, I would not be standing here today." Jordan thought about the old photograph in the wallet. The note on the back. Invest in them. Suddenly, everything connected. The wallet. The questions. The observations. The scholarship. It had never been a test designed to trap people. It was a search. Richard had been searching for character. "So your mother was right," Jordan said softly. Richard nodded. "She usually was." Laughter spread through the room. Then one of the educators handed Jordan another folder. This one contained testimonials from former participants. Engineers, scientists, teachers, entrepreneurs, community leaders. Every story began with someone receiving an opportunity they never expected. Jordan slowly flipped through the pages. Some participants came from neighborhoods very similar to his own. Others faced challenges even greater. Yet all of them shared one thing in common. Someone believed in them before success arrived. Richard returned to the table. "There is something else you should know." Jordan looked up. "What?" Richard smiled. "Last night, after our conversation ended, I called your school principal." Jordan blinked. "You did?" Richard nodded. "And what she told me confirmed everything I already suspected." Jordan felt his curiosity growing. Richard folded his hands together and looked directly at him. "The wallet was only the beginning. What I learned about you afterward is the real reason you are sitting in this room today." Jordan sat perfectly still as Richard Hayes returned to his seat. The room remained quiet. Every person around the conference table seemed interested in what would happen next. Jordan could still feel the weight of the scholarship letter resting in his hands. It already felt like more opportunity than he ever imagined possible. Yet Richard's words suggested there was another reason he had been chosen. "What did my principal tell you?" Jordan finally asked. Richard smiled. "A lot." A few people around the table laughed softly. Richard folded his hands and continued. "She told me that last winter, when another student could not afford a calculator for a math exam, you loaned him yours and took the test later." Jordan looked down. He barely remembered it. "That was not a big deal." Richard raised an eyebrow. "That seems to be a pattern with you." Jordan looked confused. Richard continued. "She also told me you spend 2 afternoons every week tutoring younger students at the community center." Jordan shrugged. "They needed help." Richard nodded. "And according to your teachers, you never mention any of it." The billionaire glanced around the room. Most people advertise their best qualities. Jordan seems unaware that he has them. The comment caused another wave of smiles from the educators seated nearby. Jordan felt slightly embarrassed. He had never considered those actions unusual. They simply felt normal. Richard leaned forward. "Do you know what impressed me most after I called your school?" Jordan shook his head. "Nobody talked about your grades first." Jordan looked surprised. Really? Richard nodded. Your grades are excellent. But every person I spoke with mentioned your character before they mentioned your achievements. The room grew quiet again. Jordan was not sure how to respond. Richard stood and walked toward a display screen mounted on the wall. A photograph appeared. It showed a group of students standing beside a science competition project. Jordan immediately recognized the image. It had been taken 2 years earlier. You remember this? Richard asked. Jordan nodded. Our team won second place. Richard smiled. Your principal told me the team captain moved away 1 week before the competition. Jordan remembered. The project almost fell apart. You stepped in and helped everyone finish the presentation. Jordan shrugged. Somebody had to. Richard pointed toward the screen. Exactly. Then another photograph appeared. This one showed Jordan helping organize donated school supplies at a neighborhood event. Then another image appeared. And another. Jordan stared in disbelief. Many of these moments had happened years ago. None seemed particularly important at the time. Richard turned back toward him. You think your story started when you found my wallet? Jordan nodded slowly. Richard shook his head. It started long before that. For the first time, Jordan began to understand. The wallet had revealed who he already was. It had not created anything new. Richard smiled warmly. The reason opportunity found you is because you spent years becoming the kind of person who could use it well. Jordan felt an unexpected lump in his throat. No one had ever described his life that way. Then Richard picked up a folder from the table and handed it to him. Inside was an itinerary for the next 12 months. Leadership retreats, engineering workshops, university visits, mentorship meetings, career development programs. Jordan looked up in disbelief. Richard smiled. This is not a reward. Jordan frowned. It is not. Richard shook his head. No, it is an investment. And tomorrow, I am going to introduce you to the person who convinced me that this investment is worth making. The following afternoon, Jordan returned to Hayes Technologies with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. Everything that had happened over the previous 24 hours still felt impossible. The scholarship, the mentorship program, the opportunities waiting ahead. Yet Richard Hayes had promised one final introduction, and Jordan could not stop wondering who it might be. This time, Richard met him in a smaller conference room overlooking the city. The atmosphere felt less formal than before. A framed photograph rested on a nearby table. Jordan immediately recognized it. It was the same picture that had been inside the wallet. The smiling woman beside the lake. Richard noticed him looking at it and smiled. Before we begin, there is someone I want you to meet. The door opened, and an elderly woman entered the room with the help of a cane. Her silver hair framed a warm smile. Jordan stood immediately. Richard walked over and gently hugged her. Jordan, this is Margaret Lewis. Jordan shook her hand politely. Nice to meet you. Margaret smiled. I have heard wonderful things about you. Jordan glanced at Richard. Who is she? Richard looked toward the photograph. She was my mother's closest friend. Jordan's eyes widened slightly. Margaret sat down and laughed softly. And for many years, I was the person who reminded Richard of promises he was supposed to keep. Richard smiled. She still does. The room filled with quiet laughter. Then Margaret looked directly at Jordan. Do you know why Richard carries that photograph everywhere? Jordan nodded. Because his mother changed his life. Margaret's expression softened. That is true, but there is another reason. She pointed toward the picture. The day that photograph was taken, his mother told us something I never forgot. Jordan listened carefully. Margaret continued. She said that success is not measured by how far you climb. It is measured by how many people you help climb after you. Silence filled the room. Richard lowered his eyes briefly before smiling. That sentence built more of my company than any business plan ever did. Jordan looked around the room. Suddenly everything made sense. The wallet, the scholarship, the search for character, the opportunities being created for students. It all traced back to a simple belief passed from one generation to another. Richard walked toward the window overlooking Baltimore and folded his arms. Years ago, someone invested in me when I had nothing but potential. He turned toward Jordan. Yesterday, you returned a wallet. Today, you reminded me why my mother's lesson still matters. Jordan shook his head. I only did what I thought was right. Richard smiled. Exactly. Then he handed Jordan a framed copy of the photograph. Jordan looked surprised. You are giving this to me? Richard nodded. Not the original, but a copy. He pointed to the words written on the back. Invest in them. Jordan read the sentence once more. It carried a completely different meaning now. As the afternoon sunlight filled the room, Jordan realized that the greatest gift he had received was not the scholarship or the opportunities ahead. It was the knowledge that integrity mattered. One honest decision on an ordinary evening had connected his future to a legacy of kindness that began long before he was born. And as Richard, Margaret, and Jordan stood together overlooking the city, each of them understood the same truth. Character had returned the wallet. Character had opened the door. And character would shape everything that came next.